YouTube, and today you join me in my Clio 172 Cup. I've had this car nearly 4 years now. I've done a lot of stuff to it in that time, and obviously I'm going to go through everything that I've learned, everything to look out for if you're in the market. So my name's James Stone. Stay with us on this video where we talk about this epic little hot hatch from the early 2000s. Me and Mark II Clio Sports, which is what this is, go absolutely way back, right to my early 20s when I was 21, 22. It was the car I dreamed of having when I owned my 1.2, and eventually I bought my first Clio. So this isn't the original one that I had many years ago. I think now we're moving on to probably my 25th or 30th Mark II Clio, which is a lot of cars. Now, the reason for that is many years ago I started a tuning business working on them. I had such a love for them. Me and a friend got into business and we ended up tuning them, making an inlet manifold for them. Real crazy time, and absolutely loved the majority of it. Now, for those that have watched some of the earlier videos, these things for me, I just think pound for power are fantastic. And as I said, because I worked so closely with them over the years, I ended up moving away from them. And for those that follow the channel, I've got the BMWs, and I thought, do you know what? I want another one back. They just can't be beaten for the smiles that you can have out of these things. Yes, they're not the fastest, but man, when you get one stripped out like this, they are such a giggle factor of a car and still incredibly capable in today's times. So I'll bring you up to speed with the Mark II generation. The first variant is the Phase 1 172. Essentially rounder headlights. You can see that they're a little bit different on the front end to the Mark II. Now for me, when I was younger, I never liked the Phase 1. I've always wanted the Phase 2, but as time's gone on, the Phase 1 for me, I think, is the more timeless one. And if you actually look at the stats on that model, it came with a 15-inch lighter OZF1 wheels. The earlier ones had the alley bonnet. They had a longer gearbox ratio because they didn't need to short them down to get the 0 to 60 times back up, because they were old school. They didn't have the weight. So for me, I've got a lot of time for the Phase 1 172, and I'd love another one, but the problem is it is essentially the same car as this, so I can't be justifying another thing to insure and tax on the driveway. Next, we have the Mark II 172 Phase 2. Now, the Phase 2, essentially underneath, was very similar to the Phase 1. They're not huge difference in cars, and you could easily retrofit one backwards and forwards. But the headlights changed to Xenons. It got a little bit fatter. It lost those 15-inch wheels and moved to a very standard 5-spoke, which for me, I don't mind the Phase 2 172, but for many people, it's the one not to go for, the standard one, because it is a very bland car. But you got things like cruise control, you got full climate control, so it became a nicer daily car back then to have as your sort of everyday car that you could still enjoy. The next variant, which is the one we're in today, now it didn't come out of the factory like this, but it's the Phase 2 172 Cup, regarded by many as the purest form of the 172. And the reason for that is they made everything lighter. And the other word for Cup I think you should use is cheap, because it just skimped on everything. You lost your air conditioning, which in today's time, unfortunately, the little bit of weight you save, I don't think it's worth removing these days, but it is lighter for that. It also doesn't have any ABS, any traction control. The glass is thinner. You've got less sound deadening, and they're very much a beautiful looking car with the colour and the trinis. For me, they always stand out, the Cups, and I do love them, and that's why I wanted to work with a Cup as a base car, because essentially out of all of them, it's the most hardcore. And like I say, they do say in the winter that it's Cup killing season, because many people now do not drive cars without ABS, and you can see why, because it's not a handful power wise, but you get it wrong on these, and like I say, it's never going to protect you because it has 0 assist, but great fun. And it certainly feels a lot more nimble in the standard form for not having that heavier sort of sound deadening, and you have lighter seats. I say lighter, they're just a cheap cloth one, but for the money, when these were out, they were the cheaper car, they were the more fun car, and it's the one that a lot of people like myself converted into a sort of stripped out road racer. Next, you have the 182. Now, these went down a storm. The Mark II Phase 2 182 and looked very similar to the Mark II 172, but they managed to remove a bit of weight from it. They got rid of that spare wheel well and put the double tip exhaust out the back. Now, the 182 came in various forms. You had the normal full fat, as they call it, the FF with all the luxury items on it, and then you had the Cup. And now the 182 Cup is not to be confused with the 172 Cup, because it does still have the ABS pump. It just had some of the features of the Cup that made it a little bit lighter. So I wouldn't get confused or caught up if you've got the two differences. I would always have for a 182 the full fat, because the Cup, like I said, did cut back on things like the full climate control. You lost the half Alcantara leather seats and that, so it was just a cheaper feeling car. And then you move on to the Cup pack suspension, which essentially was the spoiler, uprated dampers and springs, but not a big difference. I mean, the age these cars are getting to now, you're going to end up having to remove most of it anyway and retrofit refreshed items. So for me, if I was in the market for one, 182 would probably be the choice I'd go for. But again, I'd have another Cup like this, because without all the assists, it does make for good fun and it does keep you on point. So why are the Mark II Clio Sport still so desirable? And I say that because if you look at the marketplace, they're still holding strong money for what they are, especially when you compare it to the Mark III 197-200. And now for me, I've driven the 197 and the 200, and they're a fantastic car. They feel more planted, the gearbox ratios feel better, but the issue is they didn't get a lot more powerful. Even though the horsepower title states it, they actually only make about 5 to 10 brake more on average than these. And the problem with that is they got heavier, so they became juicier. They didn't become as fun. But what I will say is they addressed the braking, which is one of the areas in this car that I felt as standard was never great, because they put the Brembo 4 pots on the 197-200, and the gearbox does feel really good in the 197 and 200. I do enjoy driving them. I just think they're a little too heavy for the power. If they'd have managed to squeeze 210, 220 brake out of that Nastri S rated, man, that would have been a cool car. Like, I think a lot of people would have favoured those. But I'm not beating on the 197-200. I do like them. Just for me, I think the Mark II is a lot more fun. It feels a lot more lively. And the engine feels a lot more torquier in the mid-range. Again, whether that's to do with emissions, unfortunately, as things have gone on, that have hindered that. So what are you paying for a Mark II Clio Sport? Well, a few and far between, unfortunately, like a lot of the old cars now. You essentially get what you pay for with most situations. I've seen the Phase 2s in the region of £800 to £1,000 for ropey ones that have got rust and need money spending on it. And then at the other end of the scale, and I say these are the listed price, not what they're selling for, so obviously that's very much an open question as to whether they will sell, but anywhere from £5,000, £6,000, £7,000 if you have the right modifications and the mileage is low. So you certainly got a big variant in price. It's not consistent, and like I say, there are a few specials. Obviously you've got the 182 Trophy, which came with the Sachs dampers as standard. Not an amazing car for me over the normal one. I think, again, for what they cost now, you could build one, but if you're a collector and you do like the individual numbers, because of them obviously being such rare builds, it does make it a very sought after car. And if you're going to leave it standard, the Trophy probably is the one to go for. But like I say, for not a lot of money, you could bring a 182 up to the trophy spec quite comfortably. So I'll discuss the 10 best upgrades that I would suggest, or in my opinion, obviously they're not a professional opinion by any means, but 10 things, if I was to buy one of these again from the beginning, that I would do to a Mark II Renault Sport Clio. Number one, the tyres. This is often so overlooked by people. Like, it amazes me whenever I go to buy used cars, some of the stuff I see over the years where people have got really nice motors and they skimp on the tyres. It's the one thing that holds you to the tarmac. It gives the feedback, the road noise. It's just, why people budget on that, I will never know. So for me, the first modification, if you're buying one of these or looking out for items, make sure it's got good tyres on it. A good set of Michelins if you're using them daily, like the PS4 is a really good choice. But for me, because it is a weekend car, it only comes out in the dry. I run the Yokohama Radio Rs, which aren't a high performance, like top of the range tyre by any means. But for this car, they work really well and they're really affordable without going crazy. Like if you do put something like an R888 on there, which is a better tyre, but for the use I use, I think it's really good. But just avoid anything that you're paying £30 a corner for, like budgets on these, even though it is only a little Clio. I think is such a false economy and it really ruins the car. Number two, coilovers and general suspension refresh. Now I say that because these cars are getting on, they are getting very tired on things like wishbone bushes, track rod ends. You'd like to think that most MOTs will pick that up, but they do become tired. Stuff starts to feel a little bit old. They don't feel as sharp. And for me, when I restored this, I did everything again, all the wishbone bushes, all the actual wishbones, track rod ends, did the coilovers, did the top mounts, and the reason for that is just to tighten everything up, because rubber perishes, it gets old. And again, for me, OEM parts for the suspension, the wishbones come complete with all new bushes. I didn't want to go crazy because I still use it on the road, but I've got the Bilstein coilovers on here, and for road they're probably a little bit firm, but they really are great. It really does make the car feel alive, and you can clean that ride height off to make it really sharp looking, because they are very high 4x4 looking as standard. I'll see if I can find a picture of mine when I picked it up, and I think that was with eyeback springs on it as well. So it makes a welcome change to sort of refresh the car, make everything feel great again, especially with like steering wrap bushes, which we'll discuss later, because it really just tightens absolutely everything up in the handling department. Number three, the RS Tuner. Now the RS Tuner is hardware software that you can use to remap the Clio. It's made by Hankook Fast Chip, and I think the majority of these cars have probably had this done to them now, because I used to install the kits in the UK when we was a dealer for them, and pound for power, I don't think you can go wrong. It's an NA engine, it's not going to be a 20 horsepower game plugging it in, but drivability, especially if you've got an old standard ECU calibration, makes a big difference, because they're quite restricted below 5,000 RPM. A lot of people confuse that with some sort of VTEC feel, but it's not. It is just a restriction. The car is very linear all the way through the power curve. Obviously, as the revs increase, you get more torque into the mid-range, but it shouldn't be a step or a kick into that power. And the RS Tuner serves two purposes. You obviously get to remap the car, and you get fault diagnostics as well, which if you've got one of these, they're getting old. Last thing you want to do is have an engine management light come on and just keep throwing parts at it. So for what these cost, I mean, I don't know now, it's been a long time, but it was under £200. And like I say, if you do finish with it and you use it, you can always sell it back on. There's the use there for it to go on to others, and it works really well, like I say, for me, for diagnosing stuff. And it also comes with some nice features like the performance logger and live data, which we're actually going to do a video on the Clio next, where we'll be talking about hot air intake, cold air intake. Is it worth it? And we'll use that equipment to be able to monitor the standard sensors on the car. So yeah, for me, I think for the money, if I had a bone standard one again, that would definitely be on the list of things to upgrade. Number four, the exhaust system. Man, must just be a French car thing. The amount of times you go down the motorway, you see an old Peugeot, an old Citroen, and the back box is just hanging off of it. They unfortunately, including on the Renault Sport Clios, are made of mild steel. They've got 2 exhaust hangers from the catback. Now, the problem with 2 hangers is on the 172 is it's a lot of weight. It starts corroding, and all of a sudden it'll just break at the neck. You'll have it fall on the rear beam. It'll drag along the floor. Thankfully, most now have had lifetime stainless steel items fitted that are an aftermarket option. But if you haven't got one, or you've got like a Euro car parts, German, Swedish and French pattern one, they're not very good. The aftermarket ones that are available on these just do not last long. They don't flow very well because they use very small diameter pipes. So if you're in the market for one, again, if it hasn't had it done, go stainless steel. And man, there are some options out there. I won't even get into it because it's a personal preference, but on this one it's running the K-Tech 2.5 inch twin silencer, so their road one from many years ago. The previous owner fitted this, and I've also got the DCAT, which is the straight pipe that I only use for off-road. Obviously, like today when I'm out driving, I've refitted the Cat to come and film this for you guys, but it does sound good with the 2.5 inch system all the way through. Number 5, the seat upgrade. Man, for me, because of my height, this one's a big one, because I'm 6'2". In the standard car, if you put a crash helmet on, your head's on the ceiling, but as you can see now, I've literally dropped these on the floor. And as I say, the Bimarco grip seats that I've got here are probably a little too hardcore for what you need. I mean, the wraparound, I had this great idea of fitting these because it was going to be a race car, and then everyone commented on the video saying, well, you've built it for the Nürburgring, but you can't use wraparound seats at the Nürburgring. Balls. So it hasn't gone to the ring. I was supposed to take it to the ring, but I love the feeling of it. Like, every time people get in it, they're like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, I put my missus in it, she looks like she's on the floor. It's ridiculous, and she can't see out of these. So for me, they're really good for the feeling of improving the car. Yes, the wraparound for the road isn't necessary at all. Hardcore, yes, so too much for like a daily driver or something you've got to get in and out of. So there are a few options. The Recaro trend lines that come in the Trophy look lovely. They're a little bit lower, but the problem is the seats up the top, there's a lot of movement in them. I've never found the trend lines massively supportive, but like I say, because they look pretty smart, they do lower the seating a little bit. They still retain all the factory fiction, like going forward, backwards. You can tilt the seat to get people in the back. They're a better option. The other thing you can do, which I did to the car when we went to the Nürburgring, when it had the Recaro trend lines in it, which the previous owner had retrofitted from a Mitsubishi, was remove the spacers. Now, there's spacers under the seat. They're about 15 mil tall, and what they do is they allow you to clear the carpet so the runner can go backwards and forwards. But what you can do is you can lift the seat out, remove these spacers, put the seat back in. The runner's very stiff, so if you still want people in the back, put them in the passenger side, but it just drops that height off just a smidge to make it feel a little bit more in line with the driving position that you'd want of a performance vehicle, or a hot hatch, so to speak. But there are a lot of options out there. There are a lot of aftermarket seats. I mean, I've got the harness bar on this. It was something that I wasn't aware of massively, that if you don't keep a good angle on the harness bar and you have a crash, you can get spinal compression, which is nasty stuff when I looked into it. Like, you see a lot of people mounting them to the floor, and I did it originally when I built the car, and then the more I looked into it, I was like, I need to rectify this. So I've got obviously the brace in there now, which brings the harnesses up to your shoulder height. So if you have a crash, you are held at that point. It's not pulling down on the harnesses which pull through the back of the seat. It can actually tear the seats out of the car. So if you do go aftermarket buckets, do make sure you obviously get all the harnesses fitted correctly, as the last thing you want to do is, if you do have an accident, unfortunately end up hurting yourself. Again, back to a road going seat. My all-time favourite, which I run in the E46 M3, is the Recaro CS. I have seen them fitted in Mark II Clios, but man, they're a lot of money. Like I say, nearly 2.5, 3 grand for them new. So when you think that's probably the half the value of the car, probably not a viable option for most. But if you still want to retain complete OEM functions, super support, super comfy, and a great ride height, that for me is the one to go for. They do come in the 197 and the 200, an uprated seat option, which they don't unfortunately bolt straight into these, so you do have to get the universal base frame one. But again, really depends how mad you want to go with the spending, but I'd certainly recommend upgrading to some sort of seat that's going to be better than the OEM. Number 6, the Pure Motorsport shifter. Well, this, if you're on the forums, is the Mark II. It's incredibly popular. It gets rid of all that sloppy feel. Don't get me wrong, it's not a Honda gearbox. It doesn't make it like a whole new experience, but it does massively improve it. And for me, I would again have to do one because it just feels so direct. It replaces all the bushes into the gearbox side. It also has obviously solid links, spherical bearing bushes, so there's no play from the rubber donut. The drawback is the rattles. Man, like, I'll lay a clip of where I had the camera on the roll cage and like, or the harness bar even, that you can see it just constantly makes noise. And so many people have tried filling the rod with sand, adding dampers to it. If you can't stand that noise, that rattle, it's not the product for you, because it is a motorsport product. And to be honest with you, when I'm on a spirited drive, I barely notice it. It's just when you're cruising somewhere, fifth gear, bzzzt, oh man, like you end up just holding it just to shut it up for a little bit. But it does, like I say, finish the package off. It brings the stick up to a good height. It feels much better for it. And you can shift really cleanly with it. Whereas the standard one's a bit of a walk, you're stirring third, second. So for me, again, I'd certainly put one on a car as a weekend toy, maybe not so much as a daily. Number 7, weight reduction. Well, if you're going to use the car, as we say, daily, it's probably not going to be something you're going to want to do. But for me, as a weekend toy, not only does it improve the acceleration, it improves the feel of the torque, it improves the braking, it improves the feedback, is getting the weight out of it. There is so much shite in these cars that doesn't need to be in here if you're going to use it, like I say, as a weekend toy. Rear seats can all come out, because once you go fixed buckets, they're completely redundant unless you want a bit of security for your boot stuff. And with the standard 172 and 182, they've got a lot of sound deadening that you can peel off, remove from the car, and it's heavy old stuff, but the cups don't come with that as stand. And I've probably gone too far with this, with the weight reduction. Definitely as a daily. When the E92 packed up over the winter and the alternator failed, I did a few weeks with this, and it got to the point, like, if you can hear that, it is tin. And I was leaving the house in the morning, it was at -2. The 808Rs do not work well in that weather. And as the car was warming up, the condensation was causing driplets of water to run down on me onto the passenger seat. I was getting wet on that. It was just horrible. So I'd gone too far with that as a, you know, for a daily car, and it doesn't get used for that, and it never was planned to be used for that, but it rescued me in a few cold mornings while we waited for parts to arrive. So yeah, weight reduction for me, big bonus. There's benefits everywhere. Obviously it becomes more antisocial, but everything improves: power, braking, handling, feedback, the sensation of speed is just a win-win for me. So again, if I did start from the beginning, I'd certainly strip it out. I like keeping the dash because I like it to still feel like a car. I've kept the door cards because it's somewhere to rest my arm. You could get rid of these and put the carbon skin ones on there. But for me, this is at a stage where it's lighter, it's still usable. It's not a horrible place to be, because when you start getting framework all out, loom hanging out everywhere, you just sort of get in it and it just feels a bit naff, to be honest. But that's for me. It's not a race car. I'm not here to set lap times. I'm just trying to improve the feel and feedback of the car. Number 8, brake pad upgrade. Well, there are so many, again, choices out there now, because these have been such popular cars for people taking on track days. The market is flooded with options. For me, I run the standard discs, standard calipers, and PBS uprated brake pads. Now, the reason for that is I didn't want to get carried away with going with big 4-pot stuff, potentially having to change the master cylinder. And I've never run it out of braking power on the road. Even when I used to track these, when they had interiors in them and stuff, upgrading the front brake discs and pads and improving some brake cooling by feeding some air feeds through from the fog lights was more than enough. And yes, there are good advantages to upgrading the pads and the calipers and the discs, by all means, but I've got no ABS. In this, it's really easy to lock up as it is already, and the feedback is good. I've got braided lines on there, which I should mention, and obviously uprated fluid. But I don't think you need to go crazy with the braking on these cars. Standard form, yeah, they'll fade on track, 100%. Road, they're okay. But for me, like I say, I've enjoyed having this sort of package, that it's not ridiculously expensive to change the brakes, even though I don't do a lot of mileage. And like I say, you've got pads like the Ferodo DS2500s, the DS3000s, which are a bit more aggressive. Then you've got stuff like Carbon Lorraines, which can squeal, probably a little bit aggressive for the road. But I actually came across a new pad called PBS, which is what I've got fitted, and they seem to be really popular in the Civic world. And I put these in, I thought, you know what, we'll give them a whirl, standard disc. If I don't like them, if they're screeching everywhere, I'll get rid of them. And to be honest with you, they don't even really squeal. The only gripe I have got is when you get them really hot, they're dusty, and it has sort of caused little black spots to appeal in the corner of the alloy. So it's obviously quite an aggressive compound that's in the pad, but the feedback's good. I've never had it fade. There's just endless power there. So for me, I'm happy with that. With the 172 Cup, they run a really light bias on the rear braking. They hardly do anything. You'll see with a lot of Cups that the discs corrode, like what I've got in mine, because they just really make very minimal brake effort. They just don't need it, especially now with that weight out there. But for me, if you're going to upgrade it, Brembo discs, which are like standard size, uprated pads, I've never had an issue. Obviously, if you're hill climbing or endurance racing, or going lap after lap around the Nürburgring, you'll want a big up brake on the kit. But for me, brake cooling on that setup, as I said, fed through the fog lights, is more than enough that I've found. Number 9, matched inlets and an uprated intake filter setup. Now, the Renault Sport F4R engine that are in these are incredibly expensive to tune. Pound for power, it gets very expensive very quickly. And for me, I've been there, and I've done it with this one because I've obviously got our manifold on the front from when we ran the business. So for me, it's just a good affiliation with those times. So I wanted it back on there. But if you're chasing numbers, this isn't the car for you. There are so many better engines out there, like the Honda K20, that can be tuned for a lot less and actually deliver big numbers. But essentially, the inlet manifold on these are a two-piece, they're a cast, and they're just not matched very well. So by porting them, you can really improve sort of mid-range and peak power. And then with regards to an intake, two 90-degree silicone bends, bring it round to an air filter behind the battery. You get a nice intake note, and it makes good power as well. But for me, if you're going to go mad with these throttle bodies, cams, it gets very expensive. Number 10, engine mounts. Well, like all things French, unfortunately, rubber perishes, and it seems to perish really quickly on the Clios. On the Renault Sport Clio, you have 4 engine mounts as standard. There's the dog bone mount, which is underneath the car. It links the subframe to the engine, and it's probably the one that fails the most often. The easiest way to check it is if you're driving down the road in third gear, 2,000 or 3,000 RPM, bounce on and off the throttle, and if the gear stick is doing that really excessively, there's a good chance that the whole engine's moving. Because it hasn't got shifter cables for the gear stick, it moves the gear stick. I've never seen it to the point where it's pulled it out of gear, but I think if you continue to drive one hard like that, that's where you're going to start getting issues with damaging the gearbox. The good news is you take the original mount off, you press the bushes out, and you put the Powerflex uprated ones. You get a little bit more interior vibration from it, but nothing that I would say is horrific, and it really improves the feel of the car. You certainly get that feedback between the throttle pedal and the actual engine, whereas when it gets soft, it all feels a bit like it's floating about. It's not a nice feeling, and they're about £35–40 for the Bush from Powerflex. So not a lot of money, but do make a big difference. The next 2 important mounts is you've got the upper engine and the upper gearbox, which on a standard car will sit below the battery. Now, the upper gearbox ones don't wear as badly, they do fail, but the upper engine one, they can fall apart, they can split, and again, you can start getting it where there's a lot of excess movement in that engine mount, which is just not what you want in that engine bay. It's not a nice feeling when a mount goes or it's on the way up, because everything feels tired. Rev matching down the box doesn't feel sharp, it just ruins the experience. So standard ones for me, if you're going to use the car every day, perfect. If like this one, it's a bit of a weekend toy, you don't mind the dash talking to you with rattles, the Vibratechnics engine mounts are really great, but man, do they make some noise. The vibration that comes through, like you end up smacking the dashboard while you're driving along, combined with the gear stick. It even shakes the glass in the windows. Like, it is a race car setup. So not ideal if you want to be getting in the car at 6 in the morning on your drive to work, because it'll just drive you nuts. Renault's rattle on a good day, those things amplify that on all levels, but they actually do really improve the drive and the feedback of the car, which is nice. The number 4 engine mount, which is not recognised by most as being anything relevant, and I say there is no uprated option for it, is actually on the front of the subframe. It bolts to the front of the gearbox. Whenever I've taken engines out of these, even when they've been low mileage one, this mount feels like it does nothing. It's pretty soft as standard. It only came on the Renault Sports. It didn't come on the normal 1.2, 1.4, 1.6 as standard. So wouldn't worry about that one. But the main ones, engine, gearbox and lower gearbox dog bone mount if you're going to improve them. So now with the upgrades discussed, this will sort of tie in at the same time with the things that I think are flawed with the Clio. We've mentioned briefly in the upgrade video. So we'll go through that now, and like I say, again, it's my opinion. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people saying, no, you need to do this, no, you need to do that, but it's always difficult when I'm filming trying to remember all these things, but I'll run through those now for you. Number 1, the seating position. Again, we discussed this in the upgrade and removing the spacers. The first thing you notice when you sit in one of these is just how high it is. So for me, the first thing that's flawed, that always comes to mind, is the driving position. Number 2, the gearbox. And now I don't mean the shifter, I mean the actual gearbox in the engine bay. And the reason for that is it's not a particularly solid box. Renaults have not been known, especially in the earlier days, for bomb-proof gearboxes. And like I say, a lot of these have been on track. They've been abused. And the things to look out for is if you get yourself under the car, you always generally see them sweat a little bit, but you shouldn't have puddles of oil coming out of the gearbox, because it is going to be time, unfortunately, to strip it down and replace the seal. The biggest thing, 2nd and 3rd gear synchros. It's easy to identify. If you're out on a drive, get it all the way up to 6.5, 7,000 RPM. And don't slam it in the gear, but you should be able to quickly progress without any sort of notch or kickback from the stick. If they're really worn, you'll hear a proper crunch, but it should all be pretty clean and engaged when you're going through the boxes. But like I say, if it does go or it's on the way out, the only real solution, unfortunately, is to drop the gearbox and have it rebuilt. So soon adds up pretty quickly, and whilst you're there, you've been mad not to put a limited slip diff in, because I do think with these it makes a big difference. But yeah, number 2, if you're going to buy one, you're out on the test ride, you get any crunching from 2nd or 3rd, 500, 600, 700 pounds, because by the time you've dropped all the engine out, sent it away to be rebuilt, you're going to then have clutch to be doing as well. It gets very expensive, unfortunately, so certainly worth keeping an eye out for on the test drive. Number 3, engine mounts. Like I say, we discussed this in the upgrade section, so I won't go through it again, but certainly worth having a look on. When you've got the bonnet open, if you hold the top of the plenum, you should be able to shake the engine. A little bit of movement, but if it's literally, it's going to be time for some new mounts. So you can normally see when the upper engine one's worn, because it moves in that section of the bracket. Number 4, the cam belt. Whilst not a ridiculously difficult job, it is apparent that a lot of people get it wrong. Now, like I say, because I used to work on these, tuning them, I was doing 2 or 3 a week, and the amount of cars that came in with the timing wrong, and some people get so hung up on power that they overlook stuff like this. Now, the problem with the F4R engine that's in the Mark II Clio is it's a fully floating setup, which for those who know cam belts, it doesn't have a Woodruff key, it's not locked in place. All the pulleys, once removed, are floating, so it's very easy to get it wrong, and it also needs to be done to make sure it's reset correctly. Now, the best advice I can give here is, if you're buying one, make sure it's been done by a specialist. If it's, oh yeah, my mate Bob, he used to do Astras in his sleep, he's done it, it's going to be out. If you haven't got the locking tools, it's going to be out. And like I say, it's very hard if you're not used to the car and the characteristics to spot it on a test drive. If it's really bad, it'll be idling terribly, you'll have an engine management light on, but most of the time it can go unrecognised until you either get it on a dyno, where obviously it doesn't deliver, the power curve's a mess, or you go to get the genuine timing tools, and it's like a horseshoe. So essentially you lock the crank out and then you put the horseshoe in, and the horseshoe should fit straight in the top of the cams. If not, timing's out. It's pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, with a normal car, it's not a 2-second procedure to check. It does take half hour or so, and you've got to get a set of end caps for the camshafts. But if you're going to buy one, make sure it's been done by a specialist or someone who's recognised as a specialist. If not, factor in £400 or £500 for a cam belt change, because if it does, unfortunately, hasn't been set correctly, you're going to cost yourself power, you're going to cost yourself mile per gallon. It'd just be mad to have a car that's not working properly. So for me, it's a big expense, but it's certainly worth making sure it's been done properly or budgeting for it when you buy one. Whilst on the subject of the cam belt, another big issue with these is the dephaser pulley. And essentially what the dephaser pulley is, it's on the inlet camshaft, and it's a variable valve timing pulley. And it's got a locking pin in it. It fails, and when it does fail, it sounds like a diesel. It's pretty simple. Go out for a big test drive, and like I say, when you come back, open the bonnet, leave it idling. If it sounds like a tractor, it's a good chance it's the dephaser pulley. And it's, again, on top of a cam belt, 150, 200 pounds. All of a sudden you're at a 700 pound repair bill just for the cam belt. So it can add up, like I say, quite quickly on what you may have thought initially was a cheap car. The other issue, again, back to the cam belt timing, is the rocker cover. Now on most cars, the rocker cover can be removed. You can put a new gasket in or reseal it. The problem with the F4R engine found in these is the rocker cover holds the cams in place. So if you've got a leaky rocker cover and you lift it off, that's a big no-no. It's not going to happen. So if it is leaking, it's going to be cam belt off. Again, something to factor in. It's not a huge job. There's a few seals that have got to be replaced. You need an instant gasket because there isn't like a pre-made gasket for it. But once it's changed, hopefully you should have 5-10 years of issue-free driving. So again, it's something I discussed on the build video when I was doing the cam belt on this. I just resealed it all while it's apart because I painted the rocker cover as well. Number 5, the exhaust. Well, we've discussed this again in the upgrade video. They're mild steel, they rust, they fall apart. The hangers are terrible. It's got a really poor designed one on the back, but there are upgraded options out there to improve it. And like I say, if you go stainless, it's just complete peace of mind. So again, it's something that the cost can start adding up if it hasn't been done. So it's certainly worth keeping in mind if you're in the market for buying one. Number 6, chassis rust. Well, when I was in the market for these, like I say, in my early 20s, that was not a known thing at all. But it seems now, especially looking online at the owners clubs, they're starting to rust. If you use these daily through salty weather and stuff, which I say, other than when that alternator failed on the E92, I don't, but rear arches seem to be the biggest one to be going at the moment. So have a good look around the car. If you see any bubbling, it's a good sign that it's got through. And the problem with rust is sometimes on face value it doesn't look that bad, but when you start cutting back, it can get really bad, really bad. So for me, again, if you're out looking for one of these, have a good look around the car, make sure that body corrosion is pretty good. Front wings are plastic, so you're not really going to get any issues there. Obviously you might get some rusting inside the arches, but without taking the arch liners off, you'll never know. But the rears are pretty easy to spot because the front part of the arch doesn't have an arch liner, so you can get in there, have a good look, and like I say, if it's full of crud and it's looking rusty, I would walk away. I think unless you're prepared to spend big time getting the rear quarters painted, repaired, they're not worth it. There's enough of these out in the market to find one that's got a good base to work from. Number 7, steering rack bushes. So I'll put up some pictures of mine. Essentially the rack is held onto the subframe with 2 bushes. They're getting old again, they're pretty old, and like I say, you can feel it and you can start getting a knocking noise. And if you actually get under the car and put some weight on the wheels, like on a 4-poster ramp, and you turn it, you can actually watch the rack moving. And again, this is all part of the suspension refresh, where you can really feel the car becoming disconnected and not a real fun tight hot hatch that you would hope. And like I say, it's an easy fix. It's about £25–30 for the 2 Powerflex bushes that are the uprated ones that go in there. It's a pig of a job. It's one of those ones where it like cuts your hand if you're doing it on the floor trying to get into a gap. But I've done it on the floor. I didn't need a ramp to do it. And like I say, it's made a big difference to the rack, especially because I had mine in the air and I could see it moving, so mine were well tied. I'll overlay an image of the old bushes that come out and you can, like I say, see where they've stretched, where it's just been moving in the rack. So not a lot of money, but like I say, it does make a big difference to the driving feel of the car, a lot like the suspension and coilover with the Geo Refresh. Number 8, the steering wheel. Well, obviously I've got the Seatbelt style Cup Racer one in mind, which is lovely. It's much smaller, it's got the Alcantara, but the standard ones are huge. Like, they're like a boat steering wheel. Iceberg, right ahead. I hate driving with the standard steering wheel in these. I think it ruins any sensation of steering feel that you get from these. And the problem is they melt. The thumb grips all fall apart, they all sort of ripple around the bottom. Again, it happens to pretty much all of them. I haven't seen a car yet that hasn't done it on the Mark II range, and you can get them retrimmed. I mean, we use Royal steering wheels to do the E92 M3 one, and they did an absolutely fantastic job. So you could have it done in Alcantara, they'll redo it in leather. The thumb grips, probably questionable whether they'll be able to do those, but again, it is repairable, but add 200 quid plus, and obviously a week or two downtime without the car if it bothers you enough to get it changed. And for me, it's what you look at all the time, so if the thumb grips are hanging off, it would bug me. I'd have to get it changed. Number 9, leaking dampers. Not such a big issue on the front, but the amount of cars that used to get them on the rear when I had them in, and people come and go, yeah, it handles all right, but it just feels a bit lively at the tail end. And as soon as anyone said that to me and I jacked the car up, almost 9 times out of 10, the dampers would have blown. And like I say, once they do, they're just fit for the bin. So again, it ties into that suspension refresh. If you're out viewing one and it's got standard suspension and you throw your head under there and you can see misting or you can see oil leaking, or the old MOT advises that the dampers are leaking, again, it just ruins the car. It's not meant to be like that. So definitely worth having a look out for. And I say, if you do plan to buy one and refresh all that and they have been leaking, it makes a massive difference. Number 10, finally, headlight hazing. It's a really big thing for the Phase 1 and the Phase 2. They're pretty much all doing it now. The plastic's getting old, and sometimes you can look at these and think, that's a really nice clean car, and look at the headlights and be like, just really brings it down. So it's happening to all of them that I've seen, especially if you use the car all year round or it's left out in the sun. The good news is some 2000 wet and dry paper, a machine polisher and some polishing compound, and you can have them looking brand new. Like I say, mine had started to go. These are actually from a Phase 2 172 non-cup, because I've retrofitted the Xenons because I much prefer the light with them. And they'd gone yellow, so I sanded them back, machine polished them up, and like I say, it just really freshens the front end up. It's not a big job, but like I say, you're not going to be able to do it by hand just with some sort of miracle wipe or whatever you see online. It does need to be machine polished back because the plastic is hard, but it's not a big job, and like I say, it makes a big difference to the look of the car and obviously your visibility at night. So what's next for my little Clio 172 Cup track car that's never been on track? Well, it's got to go and get mapped, really. The map's safe that's on there that we went to Surrey Rolling Road, but it's not been optimised. And I say I'm not chasing big power, but it'd just be nice to finish it off, get the map completed to the car, because obviously it has had a few changes since that base file went on there for those that have watched the project build. So it'd be nice to get it on the dyno, get it live mapped, get it just really tailored. And for me, I think a big chunk of the tuning, especially the car, is finished. I mean, I've got a few little niggly jobs like you do with all old cars to go around and work on, but nothing that's really going to take any time. In an ideal world, if I had the time and energy and I used the car more, I would probably take the cylinder head off, have head work done, take the gearbox out and put a limited slip diff on there. But I'm not chasing lap times. It's not that car for me. It's just a good time, fun car to remember those times when I was younger driving around them, like for many, I guess. So yes, it would be nice to have a limited slip diff in there, because first gear, it just does the old one tyre fire whenever you try to really put it down. As you probably see in a few of the clips, even on a hot day, it struggles with the traction in first gear. But once you're out of first, honestly not an issue at all. Again, the headwork, just to really bring up the power, because the head, if you look at one of these when you take the inlet off, it doesn't look particularly well casted. But how much money do you want to spend? That's the problem. I keep getting sucked into NA tuning, and realistically, you just need to enjoy it for what it is. So thanks guys for watching. I hope it was an enjoyable experience talking about the Clio 172 Cup that I've got here. If you did enjoy the video, make sure you give the channel a like and a subscribe. Obviously, if there's anything you want to see, future videos, future questions you'd like to see on the 172 Cup, put it in the comments. And like I say, we've got some more videos planned with this car anyway, where we're going to be talking about a heat shield and a cold air intake setup like what I've got here. So hopefully pretty interesting, with some before and after power graphs as well for you guys. Thanks for watching.